But hi everyone, my name is Rachel Cohen, and I have a confession to make. I love refactoring, like really, really love it. Now this makes perfect sense when you consider that before I was a software engineer, I was a reporter for more than 16 years. Refactoring seems to use the same part of the brain as writing and, in particular, revising your writing. Now that I'm no longer a journalist, I instead write software that helps journalists do their jobs better. Our newsroom engineering team at Dow Jones creates React-based web apps that allow reporters and editors to quickly and efficiently do things like provide live updates on major breaking news, manage photos, or in the case of the one I'm currently working on, build customized charts. So quick tangent / infomercial. Dow Jones does not have anything to do with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, or at least not anymore. We sold it in 2010. So now that you know that, Dow Jones owns publications such as the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and MarketWatch. So got that out of the way, so back to refactoring. I recently had what was, in my mind, like a very exciting opportunity to refactor the React portion of the charting app. Along the way, I spent a lot of time pondering how to best structure the code so that it would make sense to a future employee. Because when I started at this job a few months earlier, I was in a situation that's not uncommon in our industry, seeking to familiarize myself with components mostly written by developers who had since moved on to other companies. And by the way, if any of my bosses are watching, I have no intention of leaving. I just think it's a very useful exercise to imagine that you won't be around to explain your code to engineers who are later working on it. So, of course, there's all the traditional tenets of writing clean, sustainable code. You got your documentation, your tests, your comments, descriptive variable names, and so on. Those are still incredibly valuable. But on top of that, I did a lot of reflecting on how the code itself, in the way it's structured and written, can tell a story your future colleagues will understand. And it became clear that many lessons from writing and editing applied quite well. I'm hoping these concepts can offer some different perspectives on ways of thinking about coding best practices. You'll find this is in a lot of ways, very non-technical tech talk. But the idea is to really think about things in a very high level, kind of philosophical sense, instead of getting buried down in the technical part, as we often do. And along the way, you'll also get some bonus journalism 101 lessons. And while most of these helpful hints should apply to all sorts of frameworks and languages, React seems a particularly good fit, because when used right, it really comes close to telling a story in plain English. So first off is an adage I tried to follow in my reporting days in conceiving story ideas. That smaller is better. In this case, that means the smaller the topic, the more engaging the article. So quick mini journalism lesson. Imagine you're going to write something about Wikipedia. Now, you could do essentially a Wikipedia-esque article about Wikipedia, briefly touching on everything from the origins of the site to the ethical conundrums it raises. But would you rather read that, or would you rather read the 15 people who keep Wikipedia's editors from killing each other? I'm going to guess the answer is the second one, because when a topic is narrowly defined, it just flows in a way that is intuitive to follow. Humans are natural storytellers, and we have certain instinctive expectations of how a good story should unfold. With that said, when you're writing a React component, it's not like you're concerned about entertaining your fellow engineers with your code, but what matters here is thinking about each component as a coherent story that your reader, in this case, another developer, can seamlessly grasp. Obviously, this is not a new revelation that smaller is better in React, but it's often a challenge to determine how small is small enough or too small. And I hope that thinking about it this way can help answer that question better. And in the bigger picture, it's just one more motivation to remind ourselves of the value of writing smaller components. So next principle is that style never goes out of style. My former employer, the Associated Press, obsesses over its style book, which clocks in at more than 600 pages and is so famous it has a parody Twitter account with over 300,000 followers. Just one example, it was big news in 2010 when Real AP announced the change in the official spelling of website. So why does it even matter whether website is one or two words or whether the W is capitalized? As a journalist, you're acutely aware of the risk of even a single word that's unclear or confusing. Because if you lose a reader's concentration, you might not get it back. It's not quite that dramatic in engineering, as we know, but small variations in the structure of your code can make a major difference in whether another developer feels comfortable or confounded in reading it. The obvious solution to this, of course, is for your organization to create its own style guide or to adopt another company's, which I highly encourage. But as we know, that advice doesn't do you much good if you're writing a component tomorrow and your employer doesn't have one at the moment. So here's the thing about the AP style book. Even in 600 plus pages, there are plenty of scenarios it fails to address. We had a hierarchy we followed. If the term in question is not in the style book, use Webster's New World College Dictionary. If it's not in there, check how it's generally been handled in past AP articles. If that doesn't work, then at the very, very least, stay consistent within your coverage. Because the human brain loves patterns, if you've seen something before, it's naturally going to make more sense. And this can be a tricky line to walk in programming because, as we know, syntax and best practices evolve over time. So there are going to be plenty of occasions when you won't want to follow the precedent set in older parts of the code base. But if personal preference is the only reason for picking one pattern over another, then your future colleagues will be appreciative if you value consistency and try to follow your own sort of hierarchy. A corollary to this is that every word counts. I started my career in newspapers, and when you're constrained by the amount of space allotted for your article, it makes you a better writer. You're forced to scrutinize every single word, but at the same time, you're absolutely determined not to sacrifice quality. The cool thing is the result is crisper, punchier writing, which isn't to say you should turn programming into a game of how few lines of code can I write? The goal is still to chop as much as possible without sacrificing any quality. Making every word count is both about slicing excess words and maximizing the impact of each word you do use. So if you can humor me while I go off on a little tangent from my cub reporter days, one of my good friends, who was also a young journalist at the same paper, for some reason thought it was really funny to give me a hard time if I ever used an excessively fancy word in one of my articles, which is kind of weird. But the thing was, it really did make me a better writer. I would totally catch myself and think, is this a word he'd make fun of? And you know what? Not using that word almost always made my writing better. So we got another quick mini journalism lesson. If you remember our story about Wikipedia from before, which of these opening passages would draw you in? And so yeah, the last one is the real one from the article. The first two are fake. The fake ones are obviously kind of extreme examples, and I had too much fun with the thesaurus. But the point is, make the most out of each word by choosing the right one wisely. And choosing wisely usually does not mean choosing the biggest one. So back to code and how we apply that there. If the syntax or pattern you choose serves a concrete purpose, then it's usually going to make your code clearer to another developer. But if you're just showing off, you're probably just confusing them. So I hope from now on, you can each have a little voice in your head that starts mocking you if you start getting a little too fancy with your code. So you may have noticed that a lot of the journalistic examples are less about the initial act of writing and more about revising existing writing. As a reporter, I always felt like the revision process was kind of a secret formula that magically made the intimidating process of writing far easier. If I could just get something, anything, on the screen, no matter how deficient or disjointed or disorganized, it was much simpler to look at what was already there and figure out how to improve it. So in case you're curious, this is what the track changes look like for the script I wrote for this talk. And I can show you the new components I write now are at first really, really ugly. We're talking one giant component with lots of redundant code. So yeah, the one on the left is an early version. The one on the right is, I think, how it looks now. I'm still working on this particular component. I'd rather not spend too much time optimizing until I'm far enough along to feel comfortable that the basic structure of the components won't change. To which you've probably spent the last 10 minutes or so thinking, I realize that refactoring is a wonderful thing to do, but more often than not, there just isn't the time to do it because, deadlines. All I can say is that at AP, we frequently had only a few minutes, like not days, not hours, minutes, to write a story when breaking news happened. Even then, I always did at least a quick self-edit before an article was published. It came down to a mentality, viewing revision as part of writing instead of seeing them as two separate things. Doing it effectively under deadline took plenty of practicing and iterating on that process, time after time after time, but that follows naturally once you consider it an indispensable part of the process. The same is true for writing and refactoring code. So I think a lot of these things are concepts that we all do get taught as engineers, but I think, again, a lot of times we don't necessarily follow them, even though we know what we should be doing. So I think this is just another way to think about all these things, that sometimes maybe this might be the little way of conceptualizing it that might make it actually click a little bit better when you're trying to think about ways to create your code in the first place, in particular to refactor. So now is the part where I tell you we're hiring. So feel free to tweet at me if you want to talk refactoring code or revising writing, or if you're wondering why a former reporter has such a sparse Twitter account. And thank you very much, and I can do questions if we have questions, I guess. What's the stack at Dow Jones? We are currently mostly a React and Node shop.
Refactor, what's your priority? Like, you try to follow modern ES6 syntaxes?
Yeah.
That's your goal, or you just implement something like more journalism?
Right. Yeah, you're just asking about, do I use ES6 or is it broader journalism? It's honestly a little bit of both. There's obviously the more I think we might think of as the more traditional refactoring, where I've also have done a lot of moving ES5 into ES6, or moving, for instance, this refactor was actually part of doing a React upgrade. We actually were still on React.create class in these components, and we actually were not on that, even low of a version, but we still were using that syntax to get onto the newest version. We obviously had to get rid of that. So there was obviously some of that, but really this was much more about thinking about what makes a component, and within that component, how is it actually structured, and really probably has a lot less to do with the ES6 syntax. You're using it, but probably much less to do with that, and much more about thinking about, what is in each component, and even just things like, where do you break out a variable name versus where you don't. Those kind of decisions that there's no good answer to, and everybody has different philosophies about. But trying to think about it really from the perspective of someone is going to be coming in reading this, and I might not be around to explain this to them. When they read this, what's going to make the most sense to them?